Got it. We want to acknowledge the stewards of this land throughout the generations. We acknowledge our committed relationship to Indigenous peoples. We gratefully recognize our history. We realize that our main activism areas are located in the traditional homelands of the pueblos of Cochiti, Santo Domingo, San Felipe, Santa Ana, Sandia, and Isleta. The original people of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache, that since time immemorial have deep connections to the land and have made significant contributions to the broader community statewide. I'd now like to introduce the topic. We will be speaking tonight about recommendations that LaDonna Clayton, Dr. LaDonna Clayton, who is Executive Director of the Ogallala Land and Water Conservancy. The two of us collaborated on joint recommendations to present to the Legislature's Water and Natural Resources Committee on a panel that the Legislative Committee put together so they could hear about implementation of the 2023 Water Security Planning Act. Those of you who joined our workshops previously understand the background and the importance of that landmark legislation. And now we need to focus on implementing it. As another item of background information, the legislature has been less than generous in funding water agencies to deal with our existential water problems across the state of New Mexico. They took badly needed action to unanimously pass the Water Security Planning Act, but they only appropriated $500,000 to the Interstate Stream Commission to implement it. And we've recently learned that the Interstate Stream Commission did not request funding for regions to be appropriated by the 2024 legislature. So LaDonna and I are here to tell you that regions need resources so that we can do our work in parallel as the Interstate Stream Commission does what it has to do to promulgate rules, to pass the rules that the legislature mandated, and to prepare the guidelines that will show us the way that the act will be implemented beginning in 2026. But we think that parallel action now is necessary. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. LaDonna Clayton, Executive Director of the Ogallala Land and Water Conservancy. LaDonna is also a New Mexico Water Ambassador, meaning that she and I and others served together on the State Engineers 2022 Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force. I noticed that we have several other task force members who've joined our audience tonight, and we welcome them. So LaDonna, we'd love to hear from you now.
Thank you so much, Norm, and thank you for that introduction. I am, as Norm said, I'm LaDonna Clayton, and I'm the Executive Director of the Ogallala Land and Water Conservancy in Clovis, New Mexico, Curry County. And I just want to wholeheartedly echo the things that Norm shared in regards to how important it is that we really support the funding needed and make our voices heard and known regarding truly essential funding for the state, for our regions, and also most definitely for the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission. We have really been advocating for that, and during our presentations at on the panel in front of the Water Natural Resources Committee, we tried to make a very strong case for the essentiality of that funding at this time in history, and that it can't wait. And so one theme that has risen for me is water can't wait. Water can't wait, and we can't wait. So I want to talk about kind of my background a little bit as I go into my slide presentation, because it's important for you to know where I come from. I was an educator, actually an administrator, almost all of the 32 years that I was in public education, private education. So I've done both, been in both. But at one point in my career in 2016, I ran for city commission in Clovis, and I was elected in District 1. And it opened a whole new opportunity to me, and really a whole new understanding of absolute importance that I did not know existed. And that is water scarcity and some very serious times we were facing in Clovis, Curry County, and for Cannon Air Force Base. And I was asked to do 2 or 3 things almost immediately with really no background of knowledge. But since that time, I feel I've gained a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. So I was asked to host a water summit. I'm going to talk a bit about that. The first one we'd ever had there. And this was a pivotal moment for not just us, but for our community, because a collective action began to rise with this water summit and then following shortly thereafter. In addition to a water summit, I was asked to lead the water advisory board for Curry County, not Curry County, but the Clovis City Commission. And then thirdly, I was asked to lead a strategic planning effort to create what's called the City of Clovis Master Water Assurance Plan. So these things all come together in this story that I want to share with you, because what I really want to do especially is highlight the importance of planning and how pivotal and important it is to our communities, and especially during this moment in time. So I'm going to share my screen and begin my PowerPoint. There we go. And let me go back. It shouldn't have actually started there. So okay, I'm just going to stop and start again because it did not go where I intended for it to be. There we go. We start here and we'll try that again. Thank you for your patience. It shouldn't take very long. Okay, my apologies. Somehow I've lost that PowerPoint.
Would you like me to share for you, LaDonna?
Yes, I think, well, let me see if it's right sitting here in my, let me try it from here, Brittany, but thank you for that offer. Yeah, Brittany, if you'll go ahead and share it, it's still, I don't know why I'm having trouble with it now, but it's not coming up.
Okay.
Thank you. And if you can't, let me know, because I can go find that again.
Are you seeing the First slide.
Yes, yes, thank you. And my apologies again. So I want to talk about a tale of two cities and a two-pronged approach. And I gave you some history regarding my beginnings in the water world. And what I wanted to talk about is, and if you'll forward that, that's just the opening. Can I don't think I can, Brittany. I think you have to now.
I
Yes.
think so. Just let me know
Okay.
when you'd like me to go forward.
Okay, thank you so much. So in the two cities I want to talk about, because it's interesting how things have changed since we began in 2016 with a water summit, and then created our master water assurance plan, which was finalized in 2017. But if there's one thing we know about planning, it's only as effective as its implementation and the data it's based on, and the data we continue to gather, and then evaluate the effects of what we're doing. Are we making progress? Are we moving forward? And one thing that I've learned is that implementation is probably one of the hardest phases to get people to actually go ahead and do, is take the plan and make it become a living reality in the lives of the community that designed it. So that plan did not really find legs until about, honestly, until they brought me on board in 2021. So I began working for a brand new conservancy, the Ogallala Land and Water Conservancy, in 2021 October. And that plan was finalized in 2017. Some things were already in motion and they continued to move those particular plans, but unfortunately they did not move banking water in the aquifer or any type of playa restorations out in the identified area to try to get some recharge, nor did they start the Ogallala Land and Water Conservancy, which was an essential foundational point. Now the plan is fully implementing. It's in the implementation stage with all 5 action plans in place. So what you have in Clovis is you have playa restorations, you have an effluent reuse system that's quite effective, and a U pipeline is being constructed, expected to deliver water by 2030. You have banking in the Ogallala aquifer in a very specific paleo channel of that groundwater. And we've been doing that since June of 2022. We're going on 2 years now with a set of landowners, and we have shut off 51 irrigation wells. And those wells, actually, we metered them using the center pivots. And we discovered that we had 7,559 gallons of available water out of those wells, which is equivalent to almost 4 billion gallons of groundwater a year. So we are in our second year of saving, and rather than using that water to irrigate crops, we're in our second year of saving that. So these 5 plans are being implemented, and they're definitely making a difference. And I want to talk about that. And then I want to turn to a city just down the road from us. It's only 19 miles away. And I want to talk about how we approached this differently and what I believe faces, New Mexico is facing today in various areas of the state, because they don't have a plan and they're running out of water. So what I know is Clovis is not alone. Portales, the other city I want to mention, 19 miles away from us, they are not alone. However, their circumstances are much more dire than ours. So if you look at my table, look at the similarities between Clovis and Portales. We're both faced with extreme drought. We have a very high ag use of water at 93%. 93% of our water over here in Clovis and Portales goes to agricultural production, primarily irrigation farming. We have a sole water source today, and that is potable. So potable water source is groundwater. That's all we have. And we have to rely on it from an aquifer that's depleting at a very, very rapid rate. And it's continuing to show rapid depletion. We know this because I just engaged New Mexico Tech, and that's the New Mexico Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources. So Dr. Raleigh and his team came in and mapped our aquifer, not for the first time, but for the second time, because he mapped it in 2016 and then again in 2023. We have the results and data from that. And the first thing you need to know is that in Portales, the original map predicted they would run out of water 5 years from 2018 when that particular data was published. 2023, I shouldn't say just like run out of water, but they would be in difficulty where they would be having to cut back and do water restrictions because it would have declined too severely. So sure enough, 2023 June, Portales found themselves in a stage 3 emergency with their water, and they have been on water restrictions since then. They have an effluent reuse system that was built at the cost of $27 million, but it is not functioning. So currently, as we speak, they are trying to get that system up and working. And I'm hopeful that we can accomplish that they can accomplish that. I've been working closely with Portales. I've spent a lot of time with a grassroots group there that's trying to work together. Again, it's about community coming together, rising to the challenge, identifying the issues, and then beginning to methodically, strategically think and plan about what are we going to do. The challenge here is it's late in the game for planning. It's late, but that doesn't mean we can't go in and try to assist Portales from the knowledge base of Clovis and what we've done with a water portfolio. So we introduced Portales to the concept of water portfolio and began to talk about our water portfolio and our model for banking groundwater and the importance of that affluent reuse water system. Now you can see on my slide that system is saving us 4.08 million gallons per day, whereas the Portales system has stalled. You can see that Portales is waiting for, and they put their confidence. I'm sorry?
Could you change slides?
No, I'm still on the same slide talking. I'm still on a Tale of Two Cities slide right now.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. So again, on this slide, I'm talking from the table and the bullet points on the left. So we're expecting delivery of surface water from the Ute Reservoir at the earliest by 2030. But here's the deal. Portales infrastructure is not ready. It's not even close to ready. So here's the other issue then. We have to plan for infrastructure to move that water through that pipeline into that town. And until we get the infrastructure up to date, it's very antiquated. We're going to have to make some significant changes there so we can push that water through into that city when it's even available. So we have multiple challenges, unfortunately, facing Portales, but we have very little time for them. As I speak to you, I'm talking with families, friends, my own family, by the way. I have a brother and his wife who live there. And my mom, I was born and raised there. My mom is no longer living, but she was there up until 2 years ago. So this community is near and dear to my heart, and watching what they're walking through has really captured my full attention, and it should capture all of our attentions. And it should. The urgency of communities like Portales, we should be about rising, coming forth, and understanding the importance of helping these communities identify what measures they're going to take, what can we do, what's feasible, and how quickly can we do it. Portales, there are families telling me there's a trickle coming out of the shower head. So There's very little water in many of the homes. They're not watering yards. They cannot wash their cars. They are limited to a certain amount of water for trees. And in the county area, in the co-op county area, there were several homes that are just not able because they got throttled back more than anyone on water availability. And unfortunately, it affected New Mexico Christian Children's Home. So you're talking about a lot of children and single parent families also residing there that had very, very, and still do today, very limited water. So was this avoidable? Yes. Did they know about the aquifer mapping results? Yes. Did they know their effluent reuse system wasn't working? Yes. Did they count on one source of water to come eventually? And the answer is yes. They were putting the eggs in the basket of the pipeline. And therein lies another challenge for all of us. We must create water resilience through a water portfolio, and that happens through really good, effective water planning based in scientific research and data. So two very similar communities who took two very different approaches to what they were going to do for a water future, even though both communities knew we were facing the same crisis as the aquifer mapping studies were done. So regional, local water resilience planning being recommended through the SB 337 Water Security Planning Act, we believe, and when I say we, I'm talking Norm and I, we sure believe that it is essential. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. One of the things I really want to emphasize is data just truly drives decision-making. It's got to do that. That's what it did for us. I mean, it was the difference for us. So we began with the end in mind, which truly everybody knows as the race to the bottom of the aquifer. So knowing it was coming when we discovered that at the summit in 2016, when Dr. Rawling presented his data, his research, and it was in the early stages, it hadn't been published yet, but it captured our attention. Producers, agriculture producers were at the summit. The room was filled with a cross-section of members from the community, interested people in what is this summit? What are we going to learn? Data was presented, not just from Dr. Rawling, but also from other presenters, and it captured our attention fully. And then it kicked into place water planning, water security planning for our future. So I believe first and foremost that New Mexico Tech Aquifer Mapping Program, the scientific research that it yields, the results that we get from it, provides key projections for groundwater data and management. It did for us. And it just verified for us we're in the right place in this paleo channel, beginning with the right portion of the paleo channel to save groundwater. That's the richest source. We know it for sure. We know where we're running out. We know how many years we have left in different areas. And some, it's as few as 5 years before it's completely tapped out. We had to ask ourselves, what are our water sources? We know we have one source of groundwater as a potable water source. That's it. Well, wait a minute. Hey, by the way, we have a fluent water system, reuse water. Thank goodness it's making a difference. It's putting water on the golf course. It's watering city parks. It's watering school grounds. It's putting water in even on some agricultural land. So there was some benefit from that reuse water across the entire city and even out a bit into the county areas that made a difference. But what we were doing and what we continue to try to do is diversify our water sources so that we have a mix of water sources like listed here. So currently, Central Curry Soil and Water Conservation District is very much into rainwater harvesting. Portales is talking about that now. And that surface water is not there yet. We have to wait till it arrives. And guess what? We know that even when the surface water arrives from the Ute pipeline and is transported to us, it will not be enough in times of extreme drought. We're going to face the same challenge because as the reservoir goes down and there isn't enough water in times of drought, there has to be a supplemental water supply. And that came out of the Whipple study. So we know when he did that firm yield study, his results showed we must have a supplemental water supply. And that's why we're doing this work with this groundwater at this time to get ahead of the game before the time comes when that water is needed. And then we asked ourselves, does our infrastructure support transmission of those water sources from the Ute Reservoir? In Clovis, the answer is a resounding yes. Unfortunately, in Portales, it's a no. So now it's time to help work with that community to truly get them ready if we can, but that comes at great cost. So this is going to require a lot of funding just to get their infrastructure up. Right now, they're in conversations about possibly changing from being their own water utility to letting EPCOR take that and let them manage it so they can do the infrastructure and then possibly go find more water wells to draw water from that exist in Portales surrounding area owned by private individuals, because there is not today enough water. And they're, as of today, 100 gallons per minute shy, 100 gallons per minute shy of what they need on a daily basis. That's a pretty strong amount. Before it was 500. When they shut everything down, like I described, it did improve, but we're still 100 gallons per minute shy of what's really essentially needed. Next slide. So I just want to segue into the importance of local and regional water planning, again, under SB 337. Number one, it truly is community identity that's at stake here. And I just want to say a few things about that. This is what I've learned through my own experience. This is experience sharing with you, not just something I envision or I would recommend, but I've experienced it. Local water resources for Clovis, how we came together, how we took a collective action as a people, was grounded in our culture and our history. Our water is a part of our culture and our history. And trust me, that irrigation, farming water, that is definitely rooted in generational agricultural production. So to have these producers come forward and voluntarily cease irrigation pumping for the sake of a community to survive, for the sake of a military installation, and even a county. They willingly did that. They willingly shut off the water, and we found a method to compensate them for that water. So we found funding sources to actually lease the water so that they could have their livelihood secured, but at the same time, we're getting a water source secured. So it's a win-win. And what I can say is we see those partners in agriculture as heroes in our community. And every chance that I get, we give recognition to them for what they're doing and what they've done. Now we're moving into conservation easements, and I just turned in applications for the first 7 of those individual agriculture producers. I just got those turned in last night, and now we're in motion to put 80% of that groundwater in a perpetual easement, and 20% remains under the control of the landowner. And there's a reason for that. They need 20% for the livestock and the domestic use, and then the remaining water, and there will be remaining water, is theirs to use or sell as they please of the 20%. This is a unique model, but we have really spent time designing this model and determining how to make this work so that we can have about a 40-year, minimally we're looking at 40 years as we continue to gain more water across that paleo channel from other wells. Okay, so Community engagement creates community ownership. I think that's one of the strongest points I can possibly make, is that when you plan regional and local water planning, recognizes and cultivates community involvement and decision-making, you truly invite adequate input to the table. And then you're ensuring the needs and decisions of residents are considered. So they have a voice in the decisions being made about the very water that they rely on for their livelihoods, for their families, for their existence. So this is a very important thing that we did, a very important step that we took, is to bring a cross section of the entire community together in the strategic planning effort to develop the master water assurance plan, and then in the implementation process. And then the city comes in with their support. Here comes the county. I mean, I have support from both of those entities for the Ogallala. And I make continual reports on behalf of the city, behalf of the county, so that we keep everyone in the know about progress being made with their water. We are forecasting the impacts of climate change, and it's helping us to adapt to these changing weather patterns, because we are meeting with extreme events, and drought is our big one. Water quality improvement, making sure that we look at the water quality. As you know, we have PFOS, PFOA that we're dealing with at Cannon Air Force Base on the other side of the base. It's not on the base, but it is on an agriculture producer's land. And right now, Cannon is cleaning that water and has just begun that work. But we do care about water quality for the sake of public health, to have reliable water. That's an essential to their lives as well. Next slide. Resource sustainability. Local and regional water planning ensures sustainable use and management of water resources, and it safeguards them for future generations. I've heard this again and again from the Portales residents. LaDonna, my children and my children's children, I mean, this is my community, this is my home. And I wanted to raise my children here. And my mom and dad gave me this land. My mom and dad gave me this property. And I don't want to move. I don't want to pick up everything and go somewhere else because there's no water. We have to solve this, LaDonna. What are we going to do? What can we do? Where do we go next? And that's why this is so urgent. That's why it's so important to me, because these are real people who I've known my whole life, many of them, and some born after me. And my people, again, are there. So I talk about that community, but according to Andrew Erdman, there are about 200 more communities in New Mexico that are approaching this point, 200 more. Little rural communities facing water crises. So we have to be about safeguarding this water, our water, for future generations. Economic stability. Water is essential to economic stability. We have to plan for that. But guess what? That means don't bring in new businesses that are high water demand businesses. We can no longer support that. We know we can't support new agricultural production. It can't happen. Right now, I have farmers telling me, LaDonna, I want to do whatever I can, because the truth is, the water's going away. The water's not going to be here. I don't want to lose all the water. I don't want to wait till the water's gone to make a decision. So we're transitioning these farmers into dryland crops. We're transitioning them into grasslands. We're transitioning them into grazing. And also they're willing to do wildlife management, habitat restoration, playa restoration, so that we look at the lands being working lands still for all of the life that requires it. We are using accountability and evaluation measures. We are holding our feet to the fire. We are making sure that that which we said we would do, we not only do it, but we have to prove that it's effective, that the measures we took and implemented made a difference and are getting results. I can't emphasize that enough. In the water security planning, regional water planning world, that accountability and evaluation piece is vital. Action plans must be developed that are well-designed and with a timeline for implementation. A timeline is very important to planning, so that you, again, plan out what you can do in a given year, or how many you can take on in a given year, but keep them moving if you can simultaneously. And if not, which ones need to be down the road? Like the U pipeline's been going on for almost 50 years now. Okay, that one's been going on long before we ever made that plan. Implementation as essential. Why build a plan if you're not going to implement it? That's where the success is in any plan, is in the implementation. And again, the design of the original action plans. And then thirdly, the accountability and evaluation measures of those plans to ensure the design was sound and that it's all built on great data. So we're looking at data every step of the way, scientific, not any kind of data, but really, truly scientific research. Next slide. These are the things that I know Norm and I hit it, and a lot more than this on the list that Norm is going to be sharing with you shortly regarding requests that we're making, for the legislature to consider funding some very important items and areas. But certainly, I feel passionate about the aquifer mapping program. I know Norm shares that with me. Across the state of New Mexico for groundwater management is vital. There's also some aquifer mapping, my understanding is, for reservoirs. You can look at surface water, you can do some of that. I've only dealt with groundwater management. That's all we've had. But I will say aquifer mapping reveals so much important data that kept me from, or helped me not to be blind to what was below the ground, below the surface. You can't handle what you can't see. You can't act on what you can't see. Building capacity is essential to mitigating the water crisis we face in New Mexico. And that's why we believe that state agencies that undergird our regions and communities are essential, and they're way understaffed. Their expertise is vital to our success. So we believe the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission need to restore at least 20 of the positions they lost in the past to be adequately equipped to address urgent challenges. Now they're currently asking for 31 as their essential number. So that's important to keep in mind. And we were told they've lost 70. So that's a lot of lost positions. Water governance plays a more critical role than ever when we're faced with a water crisis. And I'm telling you, I'm living proof. Clovis is, so is Portales, but things have to change. The current longstanding model of appropriated and adjudicated water rights, permits for drilling new, replacement, and supplemental wells, and really the lack of enforcement strategies must be reconsidered in the context of 21st century water scarcity. I cannot afford another supplemental well in the area I'm working in. I can't. So I have to protest any supplemental well that someone applies for in the area I'm working in. But in truth, every supplemental well is adversely affecting my community, my county, and my military installation. And the reason being what I'm seeing happen, and they'll describe it to me, my agriculture producers, and that is, LaDonna, we just keep going down with smaller and smaller horsepower pumps. So we're down to 5. So we add more and more supplemental wells to get more and more water out of the ground. So like I said earlier, it is still a race to the bottom. And as long as some of these regulations or abilities exist under water governance, that's going to continue to happen. I haven't been able to get that stopped. So finally, on the last slide, and I'll just close with this, it's the question slide, but I do want to make these 3 things known. While the state has taken important steps, and they have, they are too small to meet the moment we are in. We must fund the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission at higher, much higher amounts than the incremental progress we are seeing. And with record budget surpluses, we must act now, because the longer we wait, the more difficult and expensive the solutions become. And water issues, my final point, affect every legislative district and every New Mexican, but they are not getting the attention they deserve. That must change starting now. Water can't wait. And that concludes my presentation. And thank you so much.
Norm, you're muted.
Thanks, Brittany, for reminding me to unmute. LaDonna, that was a wonderful presentation about an incredibly serious crisis that we knew was coming, but we failed to avert. I think that LaDonna would agree when I say that Clovis and Portales, one who paid attention and one who is now paying attention now that they're in crisis, are really the poster childs for what we need to avoid throughout the state. Unfortunately, they're almost out of water, and we've known about this for decades. We've known this is coming. And under our system of water governance, we've not been able to pay attention to that and deal with it. LaDonna, there's some great questions that we've gotten, and let me ask a couple of them to you right now.
Okay.
Joan Brown asked, could you address more what your water harvesting efforts look like?
Our water harvesting efforts for the groundwater or the rainwater harvesting?
I think she was referring, Joan, would you unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Yeah, I think both, because we don't hear too much about water harvesting. And so collectively at the, like city level or county level, but also are you doing that with individuals or schools or just on all levels?
Okay, that's a great question.
And then also, have you gotten funding to do that?
Okay, that's also a great part of the question. On the funding side, yes, Central Curry Soil and Water Conservation District, and they're my partner. They have a position on my board of directors. So it's really a beautiful design. I just want to add that right quickly because I have the mayor on my board. I have the chairman of the Curry County Commission. I have the chairman of Central Curry Soil and Water Conservation District, agriculture producer, business, and then a former mayor who really served a long time and has a long history of success in our community, having been mayor for 20 years. So Central Curry applied for and received a grant in tandem with Curry County. So the Curry County Commission and the Curry County manager joined Central Curry Soil and Water Conservation District to apply for and were awarded a significant grant to begin to help individuals implement rainwater harvesting, as well as setting up a rainwater harvesting project out by the Curry County Event Center. So it's multi-layered, but there's opportunities for people to apply to get the funding needed to do the rainwater harvesting there. Now, Portales is trying to replicate that model as we speak. They're even taking charge themselves individually as people and saying, hey, where can we get rainwater harvesting, supplies, equipment? How do we do this? They're teaching themselves. They're putting models in place at their homes. And I haven't seen Clovis do that yet because Clovis still hasn't come to unfortunately, in a way, they haven't come to the full reality that we're just right around the corner from Portales in this water crisis. I mean, our clock is ticking. We're not very far removed from where they are. And that's why we've got to continue to be aggressive. But as far as the groundwater, I don't know that I would call it harvesting as much as I'm storing it, but it's remaining in the paleo channel in the aquifer. I've had people ask me, well, what storage tank are you putting it in? Well, we're not. We're leaving it in the ground because that's where we're seeing the greatest benefit. I have a set of wells. They're called the wall wells. And Clovis, the city of Clovis, purchased them years ago, and we began to monitor them in 2015. Every October, we monitored these wells, we measured them. We watched these wells decline the last 4 years, and then they were declining the last 3 years by an average of 2 feet a year. There's 6 wells in my paleo channel that are called the wall wells. There are 4 residing outside of the paleo channel called the wall wells. The 6, for the first time ever since we shut off 51 irrigation wells in that same paleo channel, those 6 wells for the first time only lost 8.8 inches average versus 2 feet. But the wells outside of the paleo channel, also called wall wells, because they were owned by JL Wall, they have had 0 change and are still losing 1.5 feet on the average of water per year. So we believe that that bump up or that lack of decline so rapidly is a direct result of turning off all these irrigation wells. And so keeping that water right there in the paleo channel and safe storing it, because it doesn't move fast. It's very slow movement through an aquifer. In fact, in talking with Dr. Rawling, I thought it was, it took 15 years to move 1 mile based on the study and the information I gathered. He goes, actually, that's a little faster than I would say that water's going to move there. So that's good news for us as we keep it there and store it there. No one's pulling the water out of that area. So I hope I answered your question. We were able to get a grant, we got funding, and individuals are benefiting. The county is doing a pilot project, and then we're keeping water in the paleo channel, the groundwater there.
Thanks, LaDonna. Let's ask you to answer one more question.
Okay.
Then I will proceed with my presentation. And I'd like to ask the participants tonight to stick around if you're interested in a recap, which we're going to do at the end of this year's speaker series. So the question, LaDonna, comes from Elizabeth Bardwell. No, I'm sorry, from Ralph Rons, who is one of the Water Advocates board members. He asks, in your opinion, should the newly remissioned Water Advocates start to promote the need for state funding for water resources management and planning capacity for the rural areas? And what he means by that, LaDonna, is the Water Advocates just changed their name. We just changed our name to Water Advocates for New Mexico and the Middle Rio Grande to show that we are very interested in the statewide policy and funding issues focused on the legislature.
Yes, and let me say, Norm, thank you, number one, for that question. I was thrilled when you changed your name. I just want you to know, I didn't tell you this, Norm, but I thought it was one of the most important moves that the Middle Rio Grande Water Advocates made, even though I absolutely understand the importance of the original name, and the work that you've been doing is so vital, and it continues to be so. And, there's an urgency to what you're doing in the Middle Rio Grande, definitely as well. But when you put it New Mexico and the Middle Rio Grande, I was like, that opens a whole new door of possibility for the focus to be exactly on what that question posed. Should we look at these rural communities for regional planning, local planning, regional water planning? And my answer is a resounding yes, immediately.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, I'm going to talk specifically about recommendations for appropriations by the 2024 legislature. And let me find my slides so I can share them now. So I'm going to run through the 6 recommendations that Dr. Clayton and I jointly recommended as water ambassadors to the Water and Natural Resources Committee at their meeting on November 7th. So the first is Office of the State Engineer and Interstate Stream Commission staff capacity. We learned actually on November 7th that the state engineer has requested 31 new staff members in the next fiscal year. And that was revealed in Mike Hammond and Hannah Risley White, the executive's handout to the Water and Natural Resources Committee. 31 positions is what they said they need. I had worded our joint recommendations previously at 20 positions per year for the next 3 years, but we are so happy to support the state engineer's more assertive approach because the capacity, the state engineer just can't do these jobs that we need them to do. They can't do the jobs they've already been given, much less the jobs that we need them to do to face our more arid future. So this is going to be a big expense. It's going to continue, but it's absolutely essential because without staff, you just can't do the things that have to be done. Former Governor Susana Martinez's administration slashed many positions. I don't have a count, from the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission. And I heard one of the officials there say recently publicly that they are still down 70 employees from where they were at the beginning of the Martinez administration. 70 employees. And they basically can't do their job without the staff to do it. Let's see, I'm having a hard time advancing my slides. There we go. The second recommendation is to accelerate implementation of the 2019 Water Data Act. So many of you have heard about the 2019 Water Data Act. It was sponsored by Representative Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury when she was still a state representative. She collaborated with Stacy Timmons from the Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, who is now responsible under the law for implementing the 2019 Water Data Act. So the Water Data Act is one of many laws, water laws, and tools for administration that the legislature has approved over the years, but hasn't funded for implementation. But the 2023 Water Security Planning Act that passed this year unanimously specifically says that in order to assure that the regions base their planning on the best data available, it's the state's job, using the mechanism of the 2019 Water Data Act implementation, to provide the regions with the data that will be the foundation of their planning work, the definition of the problem, and the measure by which they evaluate their alternatives. Well, the legislature has never appropriated sufficient funds to any of the 5 agencies whose job it is to implement this act to do that. And this was a source of great concern for the Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force that LaDonna and I and Phil King, who is in the audience, participated in. There are 3 specific recommendations that deal with that. There's a report online that you can find by searching 2023 Water Data Act report. This is a mandatory annual report to the legislature. And in this report, there are 2 pages that lay out the funding that's needed. The analysis of all the 5 agencies says that 23 staff positions are required to implement the Water Data Act. 6 positions have been funded to date. Our proposal, well, the Water Data Act report from the 5 agencies says that they need recurring funding totaling $2.875 million and non-recurring funding of the same amount. It is an accident that those numbers are the same. They don't really relate to each other, but they came out the same. But the solution that we believe is appropriate is that the 2024 legislature, with all the windfall revenue it has, should put $50 million into a fund that the legislature can annually appropriate to accelerate implementation of this critical act. The third recommendation is to expand the aquifer mapping and monitoring program. And LaDonna has talked about that extensively. The Bureau of Geology and Mineral Resources, which also does the aquifer mapping program work, is requesting $1.2 million in recurring funding for staff to manage the drilling of a large number of aquifer research and monitoring wells across New Mexico within the next 10 years. The purpose is to expand the aquifer mapping program into critical areas where we don't have the information that's required for planning, such as the amount and extent of groundwater remaining in aquifers that have been pumped for a century, the depletion trends, how fast are the water levels dropping or are they stable, the volumes of feasibly treatable water in New Mexico's brackish water aquifers. And this is a specific recommendation of the Water Task Force in two different recommendations by two work groups, one dealing with aquifer health and the other with water management and planning. One comment on assessing the amount of water in brackish water aquifers. I think a phenomena that we have to guard against as we go down the path seeking solutions is to be distracted by what I refer to as bright and shiny objects, because they really are more figments of somebody's vision and imagination than they are real possibilities that are feasible and affordable. And the state engineer made it clear on November 17th in his remarks to the Water and Natural Resources Committee that treating brackish and saline water is necessary for some areas in New Mexico, but it will be expensive water, unaffordable for irrigation, but necessary in some cases to meet drinking water and economic security needs. So the request is a $50 million 5-year special appropriation to the Bureau of Geology to install and equip the first half of these wells. Give them the money, so money is not a continuous constraint in what they do. They can plan ahead. These agencies can't deal with 1-year appropriations like they've been getting from the legislature. They must have multi-year appropriations. The fourth recommendation is that the legislature support parallel work, collaborative work by regional entities that collaborate to help implement or prepare for implementation of the 2023 Water Security Planning Act. LaDonna has told you about the extensive activities that she and other leaders who rely on the Ogallala water for Ogallala Aquifer for their water have brought up. Have they gotten state support for that? Some, but very little. I think that's correct. What do we need grants for? Why do we need them now? Well, self-organizing, inclusive, and representative regional water planning groups is not going to be an easy task. It's going to take time. And so we should get started on that now. But any attempt to do that has to be governed by cooperation with the ISC, because it's essential that initial efforts be inclusive and representative and collaborative. You know, not one sector, one water use sector taking the lead to try to set up a program that will protect their specific needs. We need money now to address the immediate serious problems. LaDonna has described those in the middle, in the Ogallala Aquifer to you. Those are a crisis. We have a pending slow-moving train wreck in the middle Rio Grande that nobody talks about. And so in the middle Rio Grande, we don't have to deal with a crisis that would have us run out of water imminently. Rather, our problem is reducing our depletions so that the whole middle Rio Grande water management and planning effort doesn't get sucked up into another United States Supreme Court lawsuit that will take a decade or more to resolve. And in the interim, nobody will talk about the problem because talking about the problem, is making an admission. That's the way the litigation works. If it goes into litigation, everything just shuts down other than the litigation for that period of time. And then the third reason that we need funding now is to do work now. That if we wait until the until the regional water planning entities are formed and official. I mean, if we put everything in series so that first we form the entity and then we get it organized to do business, and then we do all the homework that's required and needed for planning, and then we start planning, it's going to take a really long time. We need to figure out how to do things in parallel. We simply do not have the time to do all of this work in a linear command and control from the ISC type of a process. So we're requesting a $5 million appropriation to the ISC to make planning grants to inclusive regional collaboratives to inclusively self-organize, develop regional water planning capacity, gain the Interstate Stream Commission's official approval when they promulgate the rules and guidelines that they're required to do under the new law, to prepare detailed work plans so that we can get the grants to do planning once the entity is official. The idea there is to think these things through collaboratively in advance, so they don't need to be worked through collaboratively after the entity is formed in series. And then lastly, as LaDonna is doing and as the water advocates would like to do in the middle Rio Grande, address or head off crises. The last recommendation is that the legislature appropriate funds that would incentivize collaboration. Specifically, we think it's appropriate for the legislature to set aside windfall revenue in the Water Trust Fund, which Senate Majority Leader Peter Wirth has told me he thinks could be modified with a minor amendment to serve as the funding mechanism for implementation of programs, policies, and projects that are prioritized by regional water planning entities. We also need that funding to support inclusive collaborative groups that are addressing or preventing serious problems now, such as the problems that the Ogallala Aquifer users face. And this is related to Water Task Force Recommendation 2.3. And those of you who have been following the water advocates, it's also directly related to my recommendation to the legislature last year that they set aside $1 billion. Well, that's not going to happen. But we think it's entirely appropriate and doable to set aside $250 million this year. So in summary, the appropriation requests are to restore staff capacity, and specifically by adding the 31 positions requested by the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission this year. The next thing, problem, and I didn't see that in my slides. I thought I had a slide for that, but I'm not going to go back. The task force, the Water Policy and Infrastructure Task Force, made 17 recommendations and identified 106 implementing strategies that if those strategies were carried out, would satisfy those recommendations. Passing the Water Security Planning Act was one of those 106 recommendations. There is a lot that the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission need to do, not only to implement this act, but also to implement the other Water Task Force recommendations, which are crucial, for our long-term future. And so the request here is for a special appropriation that would direct the Office of the State Engineer and the Interstate Stream Commission to prepare a plan and prioritize their actions to implement Water Task Force recommendations. The third appropriation request, which I'm not going to explain again, is to fully and timely implement the 2019 Water Data Act. The fourth recommendation, fund the aquifer mapping program and boost it up so that we begin to collect the data that we require for planning, but that we don't yet have. 5, support regional organizations in their work to do constructive work, collaborative work in parallel to the ISC rulemaking, and also to address or prevent crises, water crises. And lastly, to incentivize the collaborative solutions that the Water Security Planning Act requires. I want to emphasize or bring your attention again to one more issue. We have not made any recommendations with regard to funding to deal with the pending crisis in the Middle Rio Grande. We are fast approaching in the Middle Rio Grande a violation of the debt limit. That's the limit of the debt, the limit of our water debt. The water debt is built by consumption of water in the Middle Rio Grande that really is, well, it belongs to the people who live below Elephant Butte Dam. And I would point out that 57% of the water that the Middle Rio Grande is required to deliver, 57% of that water is used within New Mexico, below Elephant Butte Dam and above the state line. So the projections are that the compact accounting as of the end of this year will continue the trend. In fact, I believe that it is possible that we could see a violation of the debt limit as of the accounting for this year. And again, without elaboration, the violation consequences are very substantial. One last thing, these slides will be available, and the title of the slide includes a link. And I have a couple of quotations from my statement to the Water and Natural Resources Committee that I quoted here. Let me just briefly cover those. So I have a background and was trained as a project manager when I was a young water engineer in my 30s. And using those skills, I evaluated the time requirements that would be required to complete a collaboratively prepared regional water plan for the Middle Rio Grande. That's the compact region extending downstream from the Otoe Gauge to Elephant Butte Dam. By my study The distinct tasks would take 7 to 8 years to complete, will take 7 to 8 years to complete, and millions in total funding. However, we could begin some of those tasks now. In fact, we've already begun some of them, as many of you may know, without funding. And we have a plan to do the rest. Funding is required. But going on from that 7 to 8 years of sequential work, if we do it in series, I concluded that if the Middle Rio Grande Regional Water Planning commences from a cold start in 2026, after the Interstate Stream Commission rules and regulations are promulgated, and then completes the work sequentially because we haven't done early work in parallel, the Middle Rio Grande Water Plan could not possibly be completed before 2023. But a parallel approach started next year, requiring funding from the legislature, could shave up to 4 years off of that time. And that's what we are asking for. I think I'll stop there and open the floor for questions. And I see a question that happens to be in the center of my screen that I think is a great one from Joe Galvan Nash. Joe, would you unmute and ask your question regarding stumbling blocks to getting funding?
Well, yes, I mean, essentially, that is my question. What is the greatest challenge that you've seen in order to first get your message understood and forwarded to, a variety of legislators from all over the state? Where has been that blockage been primarily? And my only thought, I really appreciate the comments that both of you gave. They were excellent. But I'm really thinking that, when you ask the legislature for 31 new people in any department, it really should be about, we need to do this job and that requires this many people, as opposed to a laundry list of, let's get back to 70 positions we cut. I really think legislators tend to like to know, if we want to do X, Y, and Z, which impacts North, Middle, and Lower, New Mexico, we could do that if then we had 4 staff members to accomplish that. That's my personal opinion, but I did want to know about what you felt your stumbling blocks were.
Well, I'd like to take a crack at answering your questions. Those are great questions. So the single biggest stumbling block that I have seen is the failure of the legislature's policy committees, such as the Water and Natural Resources Committee that meets over the interim, to have their recommendations heard and recognized and seriously considered by the appropriation committees. Now, the appropriation committees have new chairs. Those chairs were in place for the 2023 session, and we got the old legislative approach of, I'm going to call it stingy incremental funding. So we have leaders, policy leaders that, that chair the policy interim committees and the standing committees during the legislative session. I hope we have the attention of the appropriators. And I know that several of the appropriators on the House Appropriations and Finance Committee are listening. And I believe we may also have sympathetic legislators on the Senate Finance Committee. But I haven't yet seen leadership expressed by those committees to the, leadership that recognizes the true crisis that we're in and takes it seriously. You also pointed out that we're not going to get funds by crying about past cuts. The state engineer's recommendation to the legislature, budget recommendation to the legislature, has to go through the governor before it's final. However, the state engineer decided that he was going to let everybody know now that he needs 31 positions. I'm not privy to what those 31 positions are for, but I think I do have a general description from some of Mike Hammond's slides that he presented on November 7th. And if we have time, I'll go over those with you. And I would say that I am sure that some of the 31 positions overlap with some of the specific positions and funding for positions that we have also requested. I don't know where the overlap is because I don't know what the state engineer's budget request is yet. Donna, you have comments?
No, I agree with everything that you've responded to. And I mean, if we knew, like you said, Norm, I do agree with what was asked, that don't you think we should be more specific rather than just 31 positions? It would be wonderful if one could say exactly what is needed and where. But like you said, we don't know what exactly they're wanting them for in what areas. So I don't know how we would speak to that right now.
There's a question from Kathy Fries. Will you be crafting and sharing talking points for the 2024 session funding requirements for us to communicate with our elected officials? My answer is, I certainly hope that we can do that in a timely manner and reach our supporters. And I guess I'd also ask that if you're interested in this, join our efforts and help us do this outreach so that our messages and our recommendations are shared more widely than we're able to do with the volunteers that we have now. Let's see. Beth Bardwell asked a question about effluent reuse. For what purpose? And she said purple pipe, irrigation use, drinking water, toilet to tap. And the answer to that question is not available, and it will depend on each region's plans. So the whole scheme or framework, if you will, for regional water planning will start with regions collaborating to come to an agreement on their water balance and their sustainability. Basically, to come to agreement on the dimensions of their problems. And then after they gain collaborative traction by dealing with those questions, they can go on to identifying solutions and then evaluating those solutions. And finally, the law requires the regions to prioritize all of the component solutions into a priority list, meaning the region has to come to an agreement. LaDonna and I both hope, and I've heard the Interstate Stream Commission director express hope also, that we can find a way that when regions can come to an agreement on something before their plan is completed, that they can recommend it for implementation funding right away instead of waiting till the end of planning. But the role of any particular water resource in a region's solutions, in a region's solution to climate, to water scarcity, is going to be something that they will determine and they will prioritize and they will decide. As LaDonna was talking about water portfolios, effluent reuse, recovery and reuse is part of the water portfolio. Let's see. Another question for LaDonna from Beth Bardwell. She says, can you say, like you say, retirement of a portion of agricultural water is to be recognized and applauded. Can you share a copy of your water lease with farmers? What other conservation strategies is the community working on among different classes of water users?
Okay. Yes, interestingly enough, let me say about the water right lease agreement, that has never been created before, not a document quite like that. And it took us, by the time we got it through Department of Defense attorneys, as well as our water rights attorney, Peter Nichols out of Colorado, and everybody vetted it. It took us about 9 months to craft that document. And I'm happy to share that document, and I'll have Brittany let me know of a way to get it to where it could be shared with everyone. I don't have it set up on a link right now, but I can tell you that, you know, we had to put some punitive measures in there, some very tight restrictions, because you have to meter, you have to keep metering the water, you have to keep making sure that they have access enough to the water for their livestock and domestic use. And we took everything into account in that water right lease agreement. We looked after and looked toward the best possibilities for our agriculture producers, while we had to protect that water now that we're leasing it, you know, at a price. But I'm happy to share that. And as far as other types of strategies being used for water management across our community by different various water users, I can tell you that EPCOR, our water utility in Clovis, has been a major player in that. And their water usage declined dramatically because of some very important water conservation strategies. And they incentivized people even for, you know, devices to use less water in toilets and other kits they made available for decreasing water use. And that was an important step that was taken. And then also, you know, the watering of yards is being done by individuals, and people really are on an honor system and following that well on what days we can water and what days we can't, and what times of the day that they're recommending that we do so. So other than the rainwater harvesting I talked about earlier, that's beginning to take hold through Central Curry Soil and Water Conservation District, and of course the affluent water reuse system. And then what I just mentioned about just water conservation methods being promoted and incentivized by EPCOR. That is probably where we are right now.
Thank you, LaDonna. We're running out of time. I let the clock get away from me now. So I'm going to close with a quick presentation of our workshops in review. But before I do that, I neglected to thank our co-sponsors and recognize them. New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light and 350 New Mexico were our first co-sponsors to sign on from the very beginning. And New Mexico Wild has joined as a co-sponsor, and we're delighted that the League of Women Voters has decided that they will co-sponsor all of our workshop series in this series, and we'll be talking to them about the next one. We really appreciate their engagement. This truly is a nonpartisan effort. It's a problem that affects all of us, and we have to demand that the legislature pay attention to it. So we had about 60, 70 participants on average. I think we were over 100 at one workshop. We have 40 now. A lot of participants have attended more than one workshop. We really haven't had any student participation. More than a third of our attendees consider themselves past or present water advocates. 38% are water advocates. The rest of our audience is broken down into the bars you see in that pie chart. What were our attendees' top concerns? Lack of funding for water planning, getting the word out to communities about regional water planning, making sure everyone, especially as acequias and pueblos and farming communities, have seats at the planning tables. Real-time communications on what is happening. Expanding the range of attendees at the workshop. And those are our concerns as well. Thank you, participants, for pointing those out. The top questions we were asked are, how can we arouse sufficient interest and concern to bring all interest to the table so as to negotiate how to equitably share the pain of substantially reduced water availability? What can we do to convince our legislators that the OSC and the ISC need more money for staff? And can you tell us more about the process to set up the regional planning process? When do you hope the first regions will be in place? Well, I'll answer the last question. I think the regional entities will be officially in place by mid-2025. And there's a lot of work that we can do in the interim. So thank you for attending. We hope that you'll join us next year. Our workshops will continue to be on the third Thursday of every month at 6:30 in the evening. We would love to hear your suggestions for other times and other things that we might do to spread the word and to address the concerns and the questions that our participants have asked and requested. But most of all, at this point, we could use help. So please feel free, please reach out to us and join our efforts. We need you. Thank you, everybody. There will be a survey that will pop up as you close your browser. We would really appreciate it if you would complete that. Water Advocates members who are in attendance tonight, please do not complete the survey. We want to hear from people who are not currently on our executive council. Good evening.
I think one more slide, Norm.
Thank you. Excellent presentation.
So I forgot, thank you, Brittany, for reminding me. The New Mexico Water Dialogue is an organization that has been active in New Mexico for decades. And its mission is exactly what its name says. It's to provide a venue and a place for dialogue about water. The Water Advocates have joined the New Mexico Water Dialogue to co-host this year's 29th annual statewide meeting, which will be held at the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center in Albuquerque. Registration is now open. The whole workshop will be about implementing the 2023 Water Security Planning Act. And we hope that we will answer through presentations and that you will answer in the audience participation part many of the questions and concerns that have come up in this year's workshop series. So I think that's the last slide. Thank you.
The very last slide, requesting if you donate or volunteer, we would love to get any donations to continue funding these amazing workshops and the many other programs we are working on, which we will be announcing in our newsletters, and you can sign up for our email on our website. I'll post a link to the website now, and I posted a link to donations in the chat if you're able to do that. We'd also love to have you volunteer with us, so let us know if you're interested in volunteering.
And Norm, I noticed Meredith has a hand raised. I don't know if she.
Oh,
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Thank you. I was just saying it was wonderful. And
Oh.
I think I did the wrong emoji. It was very wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for attending. Good
Mhm.
evening.
Good evening.
Appreciate your work.